I am finally getting around to getting the videos of the 2023 Mint 400 posted. It's always a rather daunting task to try to go through 60 gigabytes and several hours of video. And it took me being down with a torn ACL to finally get around to doing it. Pretty good race, as always. Kind of hadn't intended to necessarily come back and do it again, but the opportunity came up. And so I loaded the bike up and drove out from the Midwest. Didn't walk the course. Immediately, for some reason, thought I needed to go left here and then kick myself for the next half an hour of the race for being such an idiot right off the bat. But it happens, and fortunately was able to kind of channel that into more forward drive. So that was a good learning lesson for me as a amateur racer. I always walk the start at a hare scramble. I didn't do it here. I should have done it here. I won't make that mistake again. Such big ruts. I can't believe I got lost. So stupid. Yep, I kicked myself for a long time on that one. You really could not ask for a better day of racing. We got rain last night and it's just clear. There's a couple clouds. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. It'll be too hot later. And for now, it's 25 miles an hour in a speed zone. This is the strangest part of this whole race to me, is you're just idling until you get to the end. And if somebody else is going faster, well, they're gonna catch it. It's a very long speed zone too. You go through it twice per lap, once each direction, and as soon as you get out of the speed zone, you're just like, the eyes in the back of your head are like, oh, the guys behind me are just, they were going faster, they weren't following the speed limit, or the guys in front of you, they were pulling away. So full gas from there. We had 3 bikes in the adventure bike class, I think a XR 650R possibly, me on the 990, and then some guys on a 1290 Super Adventure R, and they had actually been here the year before, and I'd raced with them before, so that was pretty cool. The adventure bikes start at the very back. The Mint splits up the classes of big bikes a bit too much for my liking. You'll see me fiddling here. I'm playing with the steering damper. I normally ride with the steering damper low speed all the way off and just rely on the high speed for safety, basically if I smack a rock. But the bike was wandering pretty good at 80 miles an hour on those straights, so I tightened it up a little bit. The Mint does split up the bike classes quite a bit, so you see a whole bunch of Harleys here. They have their hooligan enduro class is different than the other hooligan enduro classes out there. It's specifically for the Harleys, and I think there were 21 of them this year. A huge number of Harleys out there. Some of those guys can ride too. Some of them looked like they were actually performing really, really well, so props to those guys for tearing it up out there. The Ducati Scrambler guys also had 2 bikes. I'm not sure who was riding them this year. It's been several months since the race, so I've forgotten. But those guys are always fun, and they're honestly the ones that I was trying to catch up with. So as I'm riding here from the very back, catching a bunch of the hooligan enduro guys, and I'm really trying to catch up with the Scrambler guys, which is really just the guys on the Ducatis, because they ran away from me in the past, and this year I was feeling really good about my condition, my skills had improved on the bike, and the setup of the bike had improved a lot. The suspension really was working for me this year. I was really happy with it. Quite a bit stiffer than years past. The first year I came out, it was very, very soft and wobbly. The second year was still not great. Then I started doing my own suspension tuning, and since then it's gotten dramatically better pretty quickly as I've learned what I'm doing in there, and just was really gelling with the bike. Really, really, really feeling good. And I guess spoiler alert, I crashed at the end. So if you want to see that, skip to like 2 minutes before the end and you'll see it. But that was my only crash of the entire race. Each lap out there was, I think it was 70-ish miles this year. Short laps. It was a very short course, or maybe just a very high speed course. The settings that I have in the fork is a little bit unconventional because the bike is so heavy. It's helpful to do unconventional things sometimes, but the result is for these kind of rapid impulse, like short displacement but high velocity impulses, the forks were just feeling rigid, and I needed more mid-valve bleed to help kind of soften that, take the edge off, and let everything get moving. You'll see me reach down here. I am softening the rebound clickers. Really, I wanted to soften the compression, but I can't reach those while I'm riding. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Let's see if that... Yes, there's a guy on a 110 right here, KLX 110. There was actually another guy in one of the GPR pit bikes with a custom 4-valve head and a bunch of stuff on. He was doing all right, but that just looked absolutely miserable out there to me. The bike actually skips them. Holy shit. That is a huge energy saver. Did you hear me say that was a huge energy saver? Because I can actually skip through the whoops a little. I could never do that before. It would bottom out, it would back end would buck. Pretty amazing that it could do that. And I was able to just go straight through stuff a lot more. It saves a lot of energy when you don't have to slow down and roll through every whoop. You can just kind of tap the top of them. It still scares me to do it, and I hang on a little bit with the death grip. And since this race, I've fine-tuned the suspension a bit more, and I think I've made it safer in those situations. But still pretty great to be able to do what I'm doing on a bike this heavy and just kind of rail through it and let the bike take everything. See, that was one of the Ducatis, so I caught I think that was the first Ducati I passed, getting a little crossed up there. And this is one of the guys on a Harley who was moving. I was impressed. Getting after it. I think this is where my having, several horsepower on just at the top end, because when you're pulling out of a corner, you're limited by weight and you're tired, right? If I crank the throttle open, it just goes straight into the rev limiter. Thank you, James Renasco, for the killer seat. This is so much better. Like I'm sitting right now. I never could have done that. So you just heard me say, basically thanks to James and Renasco Racing, he put together a seat kind of right before this. I got it just in time. This is the fancy GPR 4-valve pit bike, by the way. But Renasco got me this seat kind of right before the race. I hadn't gotten a chance to ride on it yet, and it was amazing. I've been riding on kind of a low seat, also a Renasco seat, but this one is a tall seat, and it's flat on the 990, and I'm 6'3", and being able to sit and be able to slide kind of up on the front of the tanks, get back if I wanted to, not be locked into the bike, man, that was a game changer for riding through this stuff, because I always used to have to stand, always, and now like I'm sitting right now. And this, I think this was the lead Ducati, perhaps. There might have been one in front of them. Again, it's just been too long since the race. And I rode behind him for several minutes, which to me, it's a combination of frustrating and the most fun of the whole race, right? Because you're battling with someone who's pushing hard, you're kind of pushing to keep up with them, and trying to find other lines. I'd caught him fine. He started rows in front of me, so like I knew I had the pace, but just making a pass and making the pass stick was really, really hard for me. And eventually we got into this slow section, and I think he finally heard me, and I was able to kind of sneak by. He made a little bit more space than he'd been making earlier, and just kind of squeaked through there. But that was a lot of fun. And then immediately after passing anyone, like, the pressure's on, right? You got to make that pass stick, and you got to make the guy you passed think that there's not a chance in hell that they're going to catch you again. Because then you can kind of pull ahead a little bit, and then you can go back to riding your ride. So I tried to work hard at that. Getting warm, I got a tailwind. Getting warm, I got a tailwind. Going about the same speed I was, a little bit of a crosswind so I could hear it in the GoPro. That will become very important at the end when I do my crashing. What happens, and it was pretty windy on these days, what happens is there's no airflow through the radiator, and especially a bike that's heavy like this, you're using a lot of power, so the fans are just running constantly. I gotta slow down. Slow in, fast out. I was really trying to work hard at slow in, fast out on this stuff. Like that. Holy shit, that worked! Oh my god, I got scared and I shouldn't have been. Of course, now I gotta stall it. Holy shit, that was awesome. It was like those whoops weren't even there. I don't think I'm gonna do that repeatedly on purpose, but it's good to know it can. Of course, I said that, and I immediately started doing it on purpose because, of course, now I know I can. Yeah, it was obviously the bike just was not capable of it before, and I was relearning where the new limits were, and they were way higher than what I thought. You can see I'm leaned way over, and you can see the dust clouds just disappearing off to the right. It was really, really windy, and I don't have the throttle totally cranked. I tend to mentally restrict myself because I don't want to die. There's not that much in it for me, right? I like racing. I love riding this bike, but at the end of the day, like I gotta drive back home across the country, right? So the bike would pull a little bit more, but it was really, really windy. And at this point, I wasn't paying much attention to it, even though I had noticed it in the fast stuff. You can see through some of this stuff that my confidence knowing the suspension can take a hit has gone up, right? So I'm hammering a little bit harder, just keep pushing a little bit more. There wasn't much sand on the course. You can see there's a lot of straight stuff here. But there was, like, this straightaway was, by the second lap, it had dried out more, and it got pretty loose. And by then, and you'll see, of course, my clutch went out. I had no clutch. It was, well, it's kind of misleading. The clutch was locked fine. I couldn't disengage the clutch. So riding through some of this stuff, I was having to be real careful, and it dried up a bunch and got a lot softer. Again, another whoop section, you can see me kind of pushing, right? I'm like, well, let's see what she can do. And the whoops they get worse the second lap, so they weren't horrible here yet, but they do get worse sometimes. And when they do that, if you don't maintain your speed and kind of keep the bike straight, it's really hard to get your speed back again if you can't like roll the back tire through a couple bottoms in a row, because the bike's so heavy that once you slow down, you can't put the power down to speed back up again. So once you kind of lose your nerve, you're just kind of stuck going slow until you're out of the whoop section, and then maybe you can try it again next time. The views, absolutely beautiful out here, right? You don't get a ton of chance to look at it, but it's enough to kind of make you smile in your helmet. This was the other lake bed. At first, I think I was only going maybe 70 or 80 here. I cranked it up to over 100 at the end, but the wind just made it so unpredictable, and I think I was straight into the wind pretty much here. Then it started to bend around, and the bike started to lean, but man, that kind of high speed in a featureless plane like that, plus the bike moving around in the wind, I'll take it a little easy. This was the Moto Pits. They've been out here a couple years now. I always try to be in a conspicuous place so I don't forget the pits, because there's so many people, it's hard to tell. Ready. That is a very, very fast, very, very short race course.
I can't believe how fast.
A lot of speed. Okay.
Mike, water good?
I barely drank any, so I'm all set.
Thanks, man. Get some. Like you here.
Yep. Okay. So I carry 3 liters of water on my back. Barely drank any of it. I maybe drank half a liter on the first lap. In a hare scramble, 2-hour hare scramble, I really don't drink much. Maybe half a liter, maybe a liter, depending on how it goes. The laps were just so fast, and there was so many long straight sections that you weren't necessarily working super hard if you could get your brain to let go of the bike a little bit and just let it walk around. This was my first lap through start finish, so you start between the posts, right? And you can see the 4-wheeled guys are lining up there, and they moved us off to the side. Of course, I went over that and was like, oh, I can send it on the last lap. That's for shadowing, by the way. But the infield section here was a lot of fun. Kind of fun to hit some little jumps and different things. And well, at the beginning it was groomed. Obviously now it's kind of torn up. So you hear me say it's so easy to go so fast, and it is. This bike, like, I'm not revving it hard. I'm maybe 6,000 or 7,000 RPM, right? It revs to 9,500. So, like, I try to take care of my equipment as much as you can. But it picks up speed like you wouldn't believe. The mid-range acceleration on this thing's nuts. It's a 100 horsepower dirt bike, but it doesn't slow down any faster than a dirt bike. It takes much longer to whoa it up, and it's easy to get yourself a little bit crossed up, and that little hiccup that you saw right after I said that could have easily been a pretty gnarly high side or swap out. And it's just one of those things where you kind of got to let the bike do its thing and be ready for it and trust it. And then you can't be scared of it. You kind of have to say, okay, that happened. I'm going to keep going and keep attacking, because when you get afraid of it, then you really start crashing or riding too tight, or things that make it a lot harder on your body, and you get tired. You see, most of the video that I have in here, I'm not showing long straight sections. It's boring on camera. It's not super fun to watch, and honestly, it's not super fun to ride. This stuff, where you're kind of railing, not single track, but like a narrow wash, this is what's fun. And probably half of the course was this, and the second lap, it really started to get this kind of groove worn into it, where you can just absolutely hammer. But a lot of the course was these fast straights where you're going 70, 80, 90 miles an hour, and you can go even faster if you've got the balls and want to hang it out there. My steering bearings or wheel bearings are going. Either the steering bearings or the wheel bearings are starting to go. I did have a little bit of damage to the bike by the end, and part of it was from the crash, which amazingly the only damage from that didn't even twist the triple trees, it just dented the muffler. But at the end I had my clutch failure, which was a banjo bolt that came loose and all the clutch fluid leaked out. And the other issue that I had was the nut on the top triple clamp backed off, and it was only held on by the steering damper. The steering wasn't totally loose because there is a pinch bolt on these bikes, but it had loosened up a lot, and that's what I was feeling kind of funking around in the front end. That came out of nowhere. Which I'm sure when I look back at the video, it'll be very obvious, and it'll just be that I was looking at my front wheel. You just heard me say, oh, I have no clutch, this will be fun. This is where I figured it out. And I'm thinking, well, I need to be very careful that I don't stall it just by like dragging the back brake over stuff, or using the back brake to straighten the bike out, or going into a corner in the wrong gear. So I kind of slowed down a bit through a lot of this, because I realized I use the clutch all the time. It's hard to ride without the clutch. I just realized how much I was pulling it in for everything. Like that. And a lot of times, like, I don't need to use the clutch when I do. It's a little bit of just a habit, maybe from riding a two-stroke, but I find that, if I'm going into a corner, I can balance the bike better with the brakes if the clutch is pulled in some really rough stuff, right? And sometimes coming out of a corner, these bikes are notorious, especially this is a 2007 990 with the really sharp throttle response everyone complains about. And one of the ways that you tame that is you roll into a corner with a clutch in, and then you clutch it midway through the corner and roll out. And if you don't have a clutch, that really abrupt on and off throttle transition gets very tiring. If you look at the bike now on this section, like, you can't really see it in the ground, but look at the chatter in the windshield and the chatter in the tower. This is where my suspension's not doing what it should yet, and I know if it's because they're still open chamber forks and I'm cavitating things and it's just hammering up and down or what, but on that short, intense thing, it's just hammers you. Let's see. Oh, I have a clutch. So I got to the pits. I knew there was no one in my class close behind me, so I took the time to bleed the clutch, figured out that banjo bolt was screwed up, tightened it down, got my clutch back, and then went to the finish, because I didn't want to deal with, these things have fairly weak starter systems with a sprag clutch, and I really didn't want to damage that just trying to get across the finish line a couple minutes faster when I had plenty of buffer. So here's the moment of truth. That all happens in slow motion in your head. When you're on the bike and you feel it go and the bike is that heavy that you can't kind of wriggle it back underneath you, I definitely had a, okay, what do I do now kind of moment. Fortunately, I landed wheels first and the suspension really took the hit.
Yeah, so yeah, like she said, you can go that way or that way, whatever. But your
Okay.
pit's right there, so.
Yeah, so
they never flag off the vintage for some reason and the 2 lappers.
yeah, okay.
So, sorry you didn't get a
That's frustrating.
checker.
I'm not super worried as long as I'm scored properly as like
Yeah, so
doing it.
you're tracking, so.
So
But
okay.
yeah, so if you already got around twice, this happens every year, and they're like,
Well, I did 3 laps on this bike last year.
yeah.
So
Like we had like 3 guys last year be like, I'm not going over that bridge again.
right. Okay. Well, I'll go back and.
Right on, let's send this guy, and then you can head on out.
Okay.
All right, man, good job.
All right. Every year it's a little bit of chaos with the finish. This year was no exception. Me and I think the 2 guys on Ducatis who were real quick. We were all kind of just milling around, riding around the pits and trying to figure out where to go and how to get to the finish. And eventually we figured it out, but it's definitely a little bit of a challenge. So if you go do this race, be ready for that.